was an investigation after everything was finished in 2006. I got a call from Scotland Yard, Serious Crime Office, they call themselves. And they asked me all kinds of questions, mostly about our Egyptian partner. So I'm sure there's something going on there.
Today on If Passports Could Talk, we chat with Christoph Kapeller. Born in southeastern Austria, only 10 miles from the Slovenian border, Christoph Kapeller realized his yearning to build and explore at an early age. From quaint natural views along the countryside to colorful buildings in cities like Graz and Vienna, childhood was full of inspirational vistas.
I grew up in a small place. I think it's about 10,000 people in south of Graz in what they call the Western Styrian area. It's basically a place is called Deutschlandsberg, and it's at the foot of a medium-high mountain, and there's all vineyards and hills around it. Very beautiful. My father was a pharmacist. He owned a pharmacy at the main street of the town. Oh, he was a very interesting, very generous guy. He was a pharmacist. Also, he had various other hobbies, if you call that. So he was a passionate hunter, but not really into shooting deer. He was more into well, he did shoot them too, but more or less he was fascinated by nature, fascinated by the animals, fascinated by being out there. And there were a lot of times when I went with him. And he was also, when he was young, he was a photographer. I mean, he had a hobby. He did that as a hobby. He had a dark room and did all that. He was into photography before I was born. So, I think he had pretty much given it, well, not given it up, but he was no longer into black and white, dark room, and that kind of stuff. We talked about it. He gave me my first camera. I did like it a lot at that time. And I did go and work in dark room and stuff like that, but it didn't go anywhere at that time because other interests were stronger, I guess. So I picked it up later in life again. My mother, she came from a family in Graz, which is the nearest little bit bigger town. It's about, well, I think right now it's about 300,000 or 350,000 people. And my grandparents lived there in Graz, so they would come almost every weekend to see us. And my mom was a very good cook, and she was into music. She loved the opera. She loved classical music, so I got a lot to classical music. Of course, at that time, I wasn't very fond of it, rebelled against it. She also worked part-time in the pharmacy. She had a lot of, she was very busy, doing the three children, household, and working in the pharmacy. And she would, tell us stories. And she was very, very kind and very, very beautiful woman. I mean, it was a multi-generational household. We also, my grandmother, on the father's side, she lived there, and I also have some memory of my grandfather from my father's side. Although he died when I was really young, but I still remember him taking long walks with him. So it was a multi-generational, and when we had the garden, that was taken care of by my grandmother. And I think my mother was not into that. She was not a gardener. She was not into that. She was more a city girl. My father's family were more from the countryside, and my mother's family were city people. We would also spend a lot of time in Graz at my the place of my grandparents. So, and I had an uncle. There was an uncle there. There were many uncle and aunts, and so you know it was actually not an issue. But I think for her, as I realized later, the little town was, she didn't feel quite comfortable there. And we were three children. I was the oldest. I had two siblings, brother 3 years younger, a sister 6 years younger. What I remember most about the place, I think, was the exploration because in at that time, I was born in '56. At that time in Austria, children could basically just roam the place without any, or at least I was allowed to do that with any supervision, so we could go anywhere. And there's plenty of places to explore, and we had great fun in this little town. I probably shouldn't talk about. But there's it's surrounded by beautiful nature, and there is these. We have this gorge in the back where there's a river coming through, and we're swimming there, fishing. Even though we were not allowed to fish, but we did it anyway. I remember school. I remember the smell of the school mostly because it was, they had these old desks, wooden desks with a. It was very old-fashioned at school. So I remember the smell of polished wood and things like that. I think that's what sticks out. Then we had a very nice teacher in primary school. We all loved her, and then she retired, and we were all very sad. Things like that.
Imported music, movies, and literature also provided wonder and motivation to experience the world beyond nearby mountaintops.
I remember the time when we didn't have a TV, but TV pretty much came in when I was probably 10 years old or so. And then from there on, of course, it would be the news, and the news would include the United States. And one thing I remember, there was a radio show. It was called the Music Box, I think. It was every day at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and I was listening to that, and they would bring all the latest music from the UK and from the United States, and of course, I think that was my primary education on the United States. I think it started out musically. It started out musically. That was very influential. That I was religiously listening to that shows. Listen to all this American new music. Well, it was the time of the Rolling Stones. It was the time of Bob Dylan. It was that was, and then jazz, of course. So that was my passion. I went to these. They had these fabulous jazz concerts. They had everybody was there. Miles Davis, and I went to those a lot. Even when I think I started going when I was 16, 17. They would have them every year, and the biggest guys or women in jazz would show up, and it was just fabulous. They had those festivals in the middle of nowhere where you just put up tents and things, like little Woodstock for one day. It was good. I was into sports. I was into track and field and skiing. Of course, every Austrian is into skiing, but I was into the racing. I didn't have great success, but I was into ski racing. I was into swimming and track and field, and we did that a lot. The way I got into arts, in high school, I had a teacher whom I'm still in contact with him. His name is Wolfgang Tammo, and he was very influential. So he was basically the one that showed us things that we didn't see before, in terms of conceptual art and what's going on.
The instinct of a parent to protect can sometimes hinder the youthful dreams of a child, but dreams are powerful, and waves of disapproval may only strengthen the urge to pursue one's passions.
My father desperately wanted me to become a pharmacist. That was a bit of a problem because I was not so much into that. I was, it was interesting. Looking back at it now, it was probably the right thing. I mean, it was the right thing not to do it because, it didn't get more interesting than it was then. It was a lot more interesting during that time when they were mixing all the things by themselves and making their own pills. Nowadays, when it's just basically a salesperson's job, more or less. I remember people sitting in the when I was little, people sitting in the back of the pharmacy with leeches on. I mean that was the time. That was long, long, long ago. And they would mix all these things. There was all these apparatus. They would make their own alcohol. They would do all these kind. They had all these machines, but all this doesn't exist anymore. So it was fascinating, interesting at that time. But I decided I was more into the arts, more or less, and was not so interested in pharmacy. And that, I think, was a big disappointment for my father. For instance, if you want to be a pharmacist, you have to take Latin at school, or at that time you did. So I had to do Latin, which was not, I mean, it was interesting, but it was not, I didn't think it was very useful. I wanted to do French. So no, I couldn't do French. So there was a little bit of friction there. I did the French anyway later on, but never mind. I had to do the Latin, and so when I went to university and when I was 18, I decided to do the architecture. There was a little bit of I was all dabbling in theater. I was doing a little bit of theater, a little bit of directing. I directed the Herald Pinter when I was 17 or so for a student group. I was playing with a little bit of a amateur theater in Graz. So I was a little bit into that, but the main passion was in architecture and in the arts. My brother became a musician, composer, and a musicologist, and my sister studied sociology, so none of them did it. And he finally sold the pharmacy, and he got over it. I think he was. I think he also realized that being a pharmacist was not what it used to be, and I think he had that realization too. One thing I remember is, I don't know, there was this Italian avant-garde architectural group called the Super Studio. They made those conceptual drawings. They didn't build anything, but they had those conceptual drawings of futuristic architecture, and he showed that to us. And I thought that was super cool. And I think that's when I got the bug to look into what architecture was. But aside from that, he would familiarize us with all kinds of whatever the contemporary art in the 60s and 70s was, including the abstract expressionists, United States, and Andy Warhol, etc., etc., etc. I was pretty familiar with all that. And then the other thing was that we were familiar with the architects because my parents had their house designed by an architect. So that guy would show up once in a while, and I was fascinated by him too. So I thought, this is very interesting what this guy does. He comes up with this sketches and drawings and this and that, and then they would put it into, and it would actually then become something real. It was interesting. I registered for the university in architecture, and it was very, very difficult at the beginning. It was really difficult because I didn't really have the math and geometric skills that were required at that time, which I don't think they require it now. But at that time, it was pretty tough. So the first year was really tough. After that, it became easy. I thought it was this creative thing. You create things that don't exist before, so who doesn't want to do that? But then you came in, and then you were sitting with all these other engineering students in mathematics 1, mathematics 2, mathematics 3, geometry 1, geometry 2, geometry 3, and they were all nothing about architecture. It was a university course in mathematics and a university course in geometry, and you had to draw like spheres and then cut the spheres with a plane and draw the exact cut, etc., etc., etc. We had a special drawing room, which was basically run by us students. So there was a series of 4 or 5 drawing rooms at the top of the university, where there were each one about 30, 40 people. And we would basically live there, more or less, not sleep there, but live there during the day and do all our exams and everything as a group. So that was pretty influential, I think. That was it was like this experience of a group of people working things out as a group. We would be teaching each other, or the young ones would be taught by the older ones. And I think that was more influential than school itself.
Growth often comes from triumphs over adversity and discomfort. Just as Christoph was beginning to find stability in his pursuits, he understood the need to move and overcome new challenges.
My relationship to the United States, I was interested. I was really interested to see what was going on, and I wanted to go several times. It didn't work out during my studies. So I didn't, but I was very much aware of what was going on architecturally, in the field of arts, and of course in music. So I was interested. During school, we had a lot of very interesting influences. We had people coming from all over the world to be like visiting professors. Like Peter Cook came from England, a guy called Hunziker from Switzerland. I mean, there were so many influences. So that was great. So it was a great school. In Europe, you have this thing about architectural competitions, which basically doesn't exist here, but you do those over there, and I did win a couple. So I had some success in architecture, so I felt pretty confident. I started working after I finished my studies, and I was really disappointed with that. What most architecture students are. The school is all about creating things, it's all about the creative side. And then when you get into an office, into the profession, it's more about drafting. They don't hire you to be creative there, they hire you to be a good draftsman. So getting out of school, going to work, very disappointed. After a year or two, I got really fed up, bored with it, and I decided to go somewhere else and see what else is there. And I decided that going to some place in Europe would be nice, but maybe I should go somewhere far away. In the United States, I had a friend. She is an American. She still lives in Berlin, but she lived in Austria at that time, and she helped me write applications to universities for grad school studies. So I did. I wrote about 15 or so, sent them in. I got accepted by 3 or 4, and I got full tuition and teaching assistantship here in LA at USC. So that's what I picked. And I flew over here the first time in the United States. It was a shock, of course, touching down in LA. I was lucky enough I could stay with my friend's sister, who had a house here and she lived here. So she let me stay with her for the first month or two until I found something. So that was a good thing. It was a good transition. But then the whole thing about nobody in the streets, and things being so different to Europe, that was a bit of a shock. I mean, you don't know LA, but at that time, the public transportation which I had to take was not fantastic. So it took me like over an hour and a half to get from university to that place, which is not too far away. I could have probably walked it in the same time. So it was a bit of shock. And the school was a shock too, to be honest. University of Southern California, good school, good architecture school. But at that time, and that was 1984, that was the height of postmodernism in architecture. It was all these buildings with hats and buildings with turrets and stuff like that. I was educated as a late modernist with Corbusier and Louis Kahn and Alva Aalto, all these kind of people, and to come here and then to see that what they're teaching you here is to put little hats on buildings. That was that was a bit of a shock.
The United States became a home away from home for Christoph, and citizenship was the final piece in making the relationship official.
They allowed you to stay another 2 years on your visa, something like this, to get some experience. So I worked for the late and great Frank Israel, who up to date is just, I think, one of my biggest heroes in architecture. He was a protege of Frank Gehry's, so they knew each other very well. He was different. So unfortunately, he died of AIDS in the 90s. So unfortunately, it's no longer there. But Frank was great. He was just fantastic. So I worked in his office for a year and a half. So I would say that's my biggest influence. Fortunately, I won this a green card lottery. This they have this lottery every year from different countries. So you send in your information, and then luckily I won that before my visa ran out. So I had to go back to Vienna to the embassy for the interview, but that was it. So went back for the interview and then came right back here.
Despite being born on separate continents thousands of miles apart, the United States introduced Christoph to a new passion, much different than architecture: his wife, Adriana.
I met my wife, who is now my wife, Adriana. I met her through a friend. She was roommate with a friend of mine who also, he was studying philosophy at USC. So she was a roommate with him. She came out of a divorce and was roommating with this guy, and I went to see him one day to go out to dinner. So I met her, and well, we hit it off, and we're still together after, I don't know, 37 years, I believe. Adriana, is originally from Argentina and came here in 81 or 82, and we moved together. I started working at different offices. I went from Frank Israel to more of a corporate office, a little bit more corporate office, to do a little bit of high-rise buildings. That was the time when the Japanese bought everything, the whole downtown, and they were building all these high-rise buildings. So I was part of that and learned a little bit about, tall buildings, high-rise buildings, and commercial architecture, which was very good. With Frank, we did mostly private residences, and with these other people, we did more commercial work, high-rise buildings and things like that, which was super interesting for me. I learned a lot there too. Here comes the interesting part, because I had a friend from Austria who I studied with previously. This guy is a Norwegian guy. His name is Kjetil Thorsen, and we were best friends at university in Austria. And we said, well, what we actually did, do competitions together. So we said we wanted to do another competition. So he came over here, we discussed it. We decided to do this international big competition on the new library in Alexandria in Egypt. We planned it the year before the competition, and then he came over with friends from Norway. We had another guy here from LA, and myself. We were 5 altogether, and we rented an apartment, and drew up that competition in 6-8 weeks. During the summer, I took vacation from the office. So we rented a place. They slept in that place. And we basically worked day and night on this thing, sent it in. And we thought, it's a pretty good project. But we were all very young. We were like 30, 32, 33. One day, I get a call at the office, at that corporate office in downtown. I get a call. Oh, yeah, we won the first prize in that big deal competition, because it was sponsored by UNESCO, and it was International Union of Architects and the Egyptian government. They were all behind that. I get a call that, we won that. We had to be like a week later, we had to be in Egypt to receive the prize. So we went. And so I went. I bought 2 bottles of champagne for the office and say, I'm quitting. This is it. Won a competition. Sorry guys, goodbye. So I left the office, got on a plane, went to Egypt. I mean, it was that competition was a big deal. It was not a small one. It was one of the biggest international competitions at that time. So it was a real big deal.
After years of honing his craft and establishing himself as an advanced architect, Christoph would soon find the chance for his magnum opus. The Library of Alexandria has held a position of great wonder in our historical memory since its destruction around the 3rd century. It would be Christoph's job to interpret this legacy and give it new life.
We had to open an office in Norway because the Norwegian government gave $500,000 to this project. So that was the condition that we opened an office in Norway. So we did that. We opened the office called Snøhetta in Norway. That was in '89. I basically moved over there to work on this project. We had no other project. We were like, there was, at that time, there was nothing. We did some bridges, I think some competition for bridges in Norway. But at that time when we started, we had nothing. Just won the Library in Alexandria project, that was all. But of course, you win a competition, you think, things are gonna happen right away. They don't. Took forever until this got started. So first we did a feasibility study for about 3 or 4 months. We got paid. Luckily, we got paid for that, so we could survive. But my wife was still in LA because she had a job. She couldn't just leave that job. So we had to arrange things. And she came over to Norway 3 months later. We set up shop there in Oslo, Norway. Money was very short in the beginning. And then we got a grant from the Norwegian government again. They were very helpful in this, to set up an office in Cairo to get the negotiations going with the Egyptian government. First, we had a big meeting in Aswan. There was a fundraising meeting. Then we did this feasibility study for the library. We built a big model. Actually, I had a friend from Austria, back from Austria, built that model. And we made a video. And so we presented all that at the big fundraiser in Aswan. And there was everybody, there was sheikhs from Saudi Arabia, from the United Emirates, the Princess of Monaco, everybody, the Queen Sophia of Spain, they were all there at that meeting. And so we presented the thing, and they got, I think, half or 3/4 of the money raised for this at that meeting. So it was great. But we thought this was going to be run by UNESCO, but of course, it turned out that it was run by the Egyptian government. So, and the Egyptian government was not willing to sign the contract right away for some reason, whatever. It was all political. So the Norwegian government then sponsored us to have a year of an office in Cairo. Me and my wife, we went to Cairo to open that office and spend a year there. It's a very privileged life as an expat in a place like Cairo. And Cairo is a great place to be as a foreigner because it's a real party town. It was great. Cairo was fantastic. It was absolutely fantastic. We had lots of friends, Egyptian and foreigners. We were part of all kinds of groups. I don't know if you know this English group. It's called the Hash House Harriers, basically doing runs in the desert every Sunday. I mean, Sundays there are Fridays. So it was great. It was absolutely. We went scuba diving in the Red Sea almost every weekend. It was a 5-hour drive, but we went down. It was an incredible experience. To live in a Muslim country, it's a very, very different culture, and there's a lot of things to get used to. And I didn't in Cairo. It was because Cairo is very cosmopolitan, especially where we lived in the center in Zamalek. It's an island on the Nile. There's a lot of foreigners, and people are really used to foreigners. Then, when the construction started, we moved to Alexandria, and that's a bit of a different thing because as Cairo is very open and very cosmopolitan, Alexandria is a little bit backwards and more geared to capital of memory and all these foreigners and everything. None of that exists anymore. Some of the foreigners or some of the people that used to live there out of that time, they are now in the 80s and 90s. Most everybody else is from the countryside, so it's a little bit provincial. So the only thing that's left is the architecture, the beautiful architecture where you can see what a glorious town that was. The daily life in Alexandria is very different. It's very different. So in the summer, you basically can't go out because everybody from the whole of Egypt, they go to Alexandria in the summer to spend the summer vacation. So traffic is horrendous. It's easier to walk than to drive anywhere. In the winter, it's very beautiful. There are very few people, and it's a great place in the winter. But it's how should I say? It's a lot more strict in terms of cultural habits and religion, what religion is concerned, a lot more strict than Cairo, and for foreigners, more difficult to live in. For instance, just for instance, you can't swim. There's all these beautiful beaches, but unfortunately, it's so dirty that you can't swim in it. You have to drive an hour and a half to go and swim. Every 6 months, the first lady, the Madame Mubarak, the wife of the president, I never had a chance to actually meet to him, but she came by and I had to give her a tour of the library and explain the progress to her. She always said, Capella, why isn't this done yet? It was pretty funny. But we had all kinds of people coming to visit. We had project manager that would from the client side, a project manager that would every time somebody would come and visit, he would ask them for a donation for the library. So it was a little bit embarrassing, so I didn't want to invite people anymore because I was embarrassed. So it was a lot of politics, a lot of especially at the end when people started writing about it. All these people in Egypt would read everything. So there was a New Yorker article coming out, and everybody was like crazy about it and fearful as to whether their name would be showing up and they would be fired next day. It was difficult, politically difficult.
Taking on such a monumental project was bound to be arduous, but the same fiery passion which had fueled Christoph's aversion to a career in pharmaceuticals and willingness to establish himself in new places continued to propel him against the challenges of Egyptian politics and creative production.
It was really difficult. I felt like this is never going to end. We're going to be here forever in Egypt. It felt a little bit like that. But giving up? No, 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 no. No, you don't give up when there's a building being built. Of course, it took its toll. It took its toll because, my relationship with the office in Norway was no longer that fantastic because, of course, they were sitting in Norway and I was sitting down there. So we had kind of different experience in that. That was one of the problems I had with the office in Norway because they were working on all these new competitions, new projects, every day something new, and I was kind of stuck there with this monster. That was a problem. That was for me personally was a problem because I had to really struggle to keep my creativity going there because of course I mean building something is always, even when you work on details, it's a creative act, but it's the same thing every day, more or less. They accused me of taking bribes, but I never took any, and I never gave any. So, I mean, of course, our Egyptian partner, he was the one that probably got bribed. They wouldn't come to us because we were the foreigners, and they knew that this is not a good thing to do. But they would go to our Egyptian partner, who I'm sure, I don't know, I can't prove anything, but I'm sure he got bribed. So The contractor, I'm sure, also got bribed. There was an investigation after everything was finished in 2006. I got a call from Scotland Yard or some place in England, the Serious Crime Office, they call themselves, and they asked me all kinds of questions, mostly about my our Egyptian partner. So I'm sure there's something going on there. We started construction in 96. And then basically I spent 8 years altogether in Egypt, first doing design, and then I was then the only one overseeing the construction. I had one employee, an experienced English construction supervisor who helped me. And together with our Egyptian friends or partners, we basically oversaw the construction until it was finished in 2001 and opened in 2002. Actually, that was a difficult period because, I basically broke up, or we broke up I broke up with the office, and the office broke up with me. So we didn't see things the same way anymore. So it was very difficult. It was actually very painful because I was very good friends. I mean, as I say, best friends with this Chitil guy, and I don't know what happened, but he got rid of a lot of. We were eight partners in the beginning, and without, I was spent most of the time on the project in Egypt, so I didn't pay that much attention. But he got rid of everybody, and then they got rid of me, basically. And I said, we only want to be the two of us. And I said, okay, fine. I go to LA, and that's it. So that's what I decided to do. So that's a little painful. That was a painful moment, and something that I still don't quite understand. But here it is. And then we moved back here. I got a job to teach at USC. I was There was a dean there that was very supportive of me. So they hired me first as a lecturer and then later on as an associate professor. So I started teaching at USC. Well, we started out here. First, we lived with some friends, and then we rented a place. And it's the same place that we're still in. So that's how our life in LA started. And at the same time, I started a small office in downtown, and still working on that too. So did some competitions, we did some buildings. I did oh yeah, that was another thing. We got the Aga Khan Prize for Architecture in 2004 for the library. So we were all invited to India, where the prize was given out by the Aga Khan at that time. I was doing a lot of lectures on the library with all kinds of architectural associations and librarian associations. So I went to a lot of places giving lectures, to Spain, to Costa Rica, to well, a lot of places. It's just great to teach. Students are fantastic. They come up with great ideas, and it's amazing to see all these different ideas in one afternoon. It's just we do this thing in architecture schools called studio, where it's not that you just stand out there and lecture. I mean, we do that too, but basically it's a critique session. I think it was 3 times a week, 4 hours, afternoons, to talk to everybody. You have maybe 15 students in your studio, or 12 to 15, and then you spend 20 minutes with everybody on their project, and you just ask questions. And I think that's a great way to get new ideas, because you have to deal with this. You have to be very flexible. You have to deal with all these situations, 20 different or 15 different situations every afternoon. So I think it was very, very enriching creatively, I think. Later on, it became, because my office got more busy, and then it became a bit of a drag because, 3 afternoons, 4 hours is a lot. It's a lot of time of the week. So, and and teach until 6 at night, and then go back to the office, work until 10. And it became a little bit too difficult, and that's when I stopped. I taught there for 10 years, and then I stopped.
When a creative passion becomes a profession, the feeling of self-expression may feel obscured by formalities. As Christoph's life took him to diverse sites and scenes, photography became another conduit for his desire to create.
I did a lot of photography when I was in Egypt. I have hundreds of slides and things like that of all the monuments and everything. But I didn't do it as, for photography itself. I just did it to record things, more or less. I was always interested in photography, but I never looked at it as a thing to do creatively, if you want. So that came later. That actually came. I mean, the first inkling I had is when we took the final images for the library project after it was finished. We had this Austrian professional photographer coming down to take the images, and he spent a week with us. Gerald Zuckman, and he's a great photographer. And he worked with those large format cameras at that time, and it was just really, really amazing what he could do with his photography. I got interested actually, during that week that he spent there. That's when I rediscovered my interest in darkroom and photography and all that. So in a way, you're right. It did start in Egypt, but I did not have the time to actually act it out in Egypt. What I did as for the pictures that I'm doing now, I'm doing mostly these walking neighborhoods. Interestingly enough, I've always been fascinated with the city. So going back to those illustrations that I did for Mario Gandolzonos when I was really young, the fascination with Los Angeles has never stopped for me. And that's the reason why we came back here, because it's just such a horizontal jungle that's unbelievable. So you turn off another street and you find something completely new. And that's what I find interesting. And that basically drove me to do these walking tours, which I'm doing in different neighborhoods. I got 4 so far, mostly to shoot spaces and places, the face of the city that is not normally seen. And I put myself a little rig together. So I do it actually handheld 4x5, most of those. So I have a little more flexibility. I don't have to put up a tripod. And for the night shots, I think it's too dangerous. And that's another reason why I put this rig together to do handheld shooting, is because I don't have to put up a tripod and be too long in one place and all that. So I can go to areas that are a little more adventurous. No, I mean, as far as living goes, I'm really happy here. So it's just, you couldn't basically ask for a better place. I mean, of course, there's always problems in every place, and we always complain about the traffic and everything else. But really, as far as the weather goes and the climate, there's no better place than this. And the people, the diversity, and the amount of interesting people in this city. I don't think I would want to go somewhere else to live. There's a lot of places I'd be interested to spend time in, more time in, such as Japan or Mexico City or places like that. Time and work allows me to do it, which is always the big question. And as far as retirement goes, I don't know. Architects don't retire.
Thank you for listening to this episode of If Passports Could Talk. Please like and subscribe to learn about new episodes in the future. See you next time.